I bought my very first house a few months ago. I was determined to stop throwing away money by renting, and landlords jacking up the rent repeatedly only expedited my transition to homeowner. It was close enough to the city and far enough from the noise, and I actually was able to afford it. The layout of the house is essentially a loop. You can circle through it, passing through every room on the first floor. The front door leads into the carpeted living room. If you take a left, you enter my home office, and if you head straight, you enter the dining room. After the dining room is my small kitchen, which leads to the laundry room, which you take a left to enter the home office. I moved my stuff in and got settled rather quickly. It truly felt like home. Then, one overcast day a few weeks ago, I walked to my office to get some work done, but it wasn't there. A room was certainly there, but it was not a room of my home. The beige carpet from the living room stopped dead against a dark green, tighter-knit carpet which was half the height. The room in place of my office was fully furnished. A Taylor green velvet sofa was placed against the wall, which was covered by a painted lattice pattern wallpaper of a pine hue with white flowers. In front of the low couch was a dark-stained wooden coffee table, and on that was a jade vase holding a single black tulip. I looked around the strange room in wonder. I'd never seen this room or any of its contents before in my life. A thing I noticed immediately upon entering was the fact that the room was much colder than the rest of the house. There was also a sharp odor, a sour air of mildew, and something else not quite chemical. The impossibility of the situation was overshadowed by a familiar feeling. It was the feeling of finding a tick on your body after a walk. The feeling that something nefarious is attached to your body, gorging on your livelihood. Still, curiosity compelled me to investigate the impossible room. I ran my fingers along the cool walls, displacing slow trickles of dustfall. The room seemed ancient. The ornate trim in the corners resembled that of a Victorian townhouse, and clashed with the minimalist modern design of the rest of the building. I thought of my laptop, wondering where it possibly could be now that the room it should be in was simply gone. This compelled me to do a walk around of the first story. I walked through the doorway into the kitchen, then continued into the dining room, then the living room. Once in the living room, I saw the opening to that impossible room that should not be a part of the home. But it was gone. Instead, my home office was back, my desk aglow in sunbeams, my laptop open to the exact angle it had previously been. My brain hurt trying to puzzle together how I'd witnessed what I had. Had I experienced some lapse in sanity? Some stroke or aneurysm that triggered a distant memory? Had I dreamt it, somehow vacant in a fugue state? But that acrid, stale air of the room was still in my throat and in my nostrils. It was too vivid for any of that, and that realization disturbed me greatly. The realization that it had been very much real, and nothing could explain it. I looped around the house multiple times, hoping again to see the bizarre room that had replaced my study, but it didn't happen again for some time. Work, laundry, and walking Benny, my black lab, took me back into my daily routines. Frozen meals and drive-through coffee. I'd often replay the mysterious experience in the background of my mind. Still, my office remained my office, and the days turned into nights and weeks passed by. The more time passed, the less real the memory felt, until I convinced myself I must have dreamt it. But then, roughly 4 weeks later, I came down the stairs and a chill traced its cold fingers up my spine. The room had returned. The green velvet couch leered at me from within that foreign chamber. It was like some alien appendage had replaced my study. I slowly approached it, feeling the hairs rise on my arms. Observing the room from outside, I noticed 2 things. Firstly, the room was darker than it should have been. It was as if the light from my living room stopped dead at the partition instead of spilling into it. The room was solely lit by an oval ceiling lamp, frosted glass shielding the wattage of the bulb. Secondly, I saw an insect fluttering about before landing on a wall. It flew similar to a moth, but it was larger and the wings looked translucent like that of a fly. I approached the room, getting closer to the strange bug. Once close, I could see the odd shape of its body. The bug's abdomen was shaped slightly like a seahorse, curled like a fiddlehead at the tail end. The head was something horrible, an almost human shape, at least until under the forward-facing eyes, where a clawed mandible extended out from beneath them. I stepped back from the thing, keeping my distance as I explored the impossible space. I sniffed the air, realizing the odor of the room seemed to have magnified since its last appearance. The air was musty, as if mildew had taken over the couch, or perhaps mold was growing under that ornate floral wallpaper. It smelled of sickness, decay. I walked over to the green couch and ran a finger across the cushioned back. It felt cool and damp, like it had been left outside overnight and had collected dew. How was it there? Where was my home office? Was some other home experiencing a mirrored situation, having my home office appear in place of their own room? I thought of my personal information available from my email, and dread welled within me. My bank statements and routing number, my social security number, and private conversations. With a newfound sense of urgency, I walked out of the room and continued circling the first floor, eager to get the house back to its intended configuration. Sure enough, once I'd rounded the dining room and entered the living room, my home office was once again where it should be. A sense of relief washed over me for only a second. I saw a long, black mark on the far wall. It seemed disproportionately stretched out and anatomically wrong, but it resembled a handprint of something. Something else had access to that room, and that scared me. My fascination with this mystical room was replaced by absolute dread. My study was tarnished by whatever person or thing had access to it. I moved my personal possessions outside of that study, every last one of them. The room itself had no doors. The wall openings were too wide to add traditional doors of any sort. But I browsed online for solutions in order to blockade that anomalous area until I felt safe to some extent. Worst of all, above any trickling fears of that hideous insect or the odd marking on the wall, I felt a compelling curiosity. I wanted to learn the strange secrets of that space. Something that contrasted with the stable laws I thought governed this often mundane world of ours. This was something that seemed to exist completely outside the wealth of knowledge known to man. Knowing that filled some hole inside me that I had since childhood. I decided I was going to stay and document the room. I placed 2 HD cameras on tripods facing the openings to the X-study I decided to call the occasional room, as it was all I could think of it as. I filmed for hours, day in and day out. I began walking the circle through the chambers in hope of triggering whatever event or circumstance set off the change. But every evening, I returned home to unchanging footage of the barren study. I began to wonder if the act of observing it prevented the change, and after 2 weeks of nothing, I turned the cameras off and walked through the rest of the house in a test. When I arrived full circle to the study, my heart raced into my chest upon arriving. The occasional room was back, but it was larger. I stepped into the impossible space, and my jaw dropped slack at seeing it continue on around the bend where my living room should be. Instead, that dark green carpeting spilled out into a large area with door-sized windows where my living room's windows should be. I noticed a faded chase lounge with a floral pattern from another era, as well as bronze standing lamps ornately cast. There was a hanging chandelier from a bygone era and the haze of pipe smoke in the air, but nothing drew my attention more than those windows. They were dark, bathed in the shadows of night, giving a minimal view out to some terrain vastly different than my own lawn that should be leaning up to the edge of the woods. Instead, there was a textured field of white that looked like some albinistic moss, a velvet-like surface stretching off miles into the dark horizon. I trembled as I stared at beacons of dim light glowing in the sky as my mind tried to make sense of it. 2 orange spheres hung in the visible cosmos. They looked like moons. A deep, bassy thumping sound rapidly approached from around the next corner. Something large was running in my direction. Instinct drove me and I ran, nearly tripping over the odd furniture set in different areas than my home. A warped cabinet of some sort filled with books and bones. A black, slick-surfaced contraption like a wood stove of sorts, but out of some black ceramic material. I barely glimpsed them as I ran around the bend to the original room, the occasional room, and I didn't pause for relief when I saw my laundry room. Something was gaining on me. I sprinted through, into my better-lit laundry room, quickly unlocking the second door to the outside. I raced out onto the sunlit back lawn, panting and exhausted as I slammed the door behind me. It took all my courage to go back inside, where I found the barren study where it should be, that alternate alien place nowhere to be found. I prayed my theory was correct, that the room won't appear if it's being observed, and I've set both cameras on a continual feed, streaming live and recording. Still, my curiosity has been growing, and every day when I come home and observe that empty study of mine, that desire to know more keeps growing. I've purchased a handgun, mace, and a GoPro camera. I'm just working up my courage now to go back in. I'll tell you what I find in there if I make it back in one piece. If you don't hear back from me, I strongly advise against purchasing a 2-bedroom house on Milford Lane, even if it's far more spacious than advertised. Drizzle taps lightly on the leaves all around us, the smell of pine pitch in the air as we creep through the undergrowth, my granddad and I. I run my tongue along my teeth, focusing. I raise the rifle a little higher. A way higher quality weapon than I should be using. The thing is wasted on me. I'm an appalling hunter. I'm not even sure if I agree with it, to be honest. Hunting, I mean, ethically speaking. I mean, my granddad and I eat basically anything we kill, and to be honest, I don't kill a whole lot. I send many of my shots deliberately wide. I just do this to hang out with him, really. He's a fascinating man, and the guy likes taking me out into the woods, so I just go along with it. It's fine. It's good quality time that I'm lucky to have. But we are stalking a pair of deer right now. Big things as well. I'm pretty sure the creatures know we are here, but you can get surprisingly close provided you don't actually give off any sign that you're trying to shoot them.
"Stay low, Robbie,"
he murmurs through the side of his mouth.
"Move to your right, past the bush, then it's a clean shot. Take it when ready."
I like my name, named after the man beside me, as it happens, Robert. He being Robert the First, and me, of course, Robert the Second. I nod and creep into position, taking careful aim as instructed. I see a thumbs up in the corner of my eye, and I shoot. I miss. The sound ricochets around the forest, and birds burst from a nearby tree, shooting up towards the sky. The deer wheel round in a panic and make to leave.
"God damn it,"
my granddad mutters and raises up from behind the bush, bringing his rifle with him and firing off a quick shot. My ego is somewhat relieved by the fact that he misses too, and we both watch as the deer disappear into the undergrowth and shadow of the forest. The man lowers his weapon and looks at me. I do the same thing and give him a shrug. We hold eye contact for a second, then he breaks with a chuckle, shaking his head.
"Damn it, Robbie. Every time I think I've taught you something, you manage to pull off some magnificent blunder just like that."
Hey, well, you know what they say. You shouldn't judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree.
"I ain't judging you on your tree climbing ability. You're my grandson. I'm judging you on your ability to swim, fishy."
I point to the shattered branch my granddad caused when he fired his shot.
"I am truly learning from the best."
He snorts with a laugh, thumping me on the chest. Come on, let's track him. Plenty daylight left. We push around the bush and head through the little clearing, stepping over a fallen log and making to follow the route the deer both took. But my granddad suddenly stops and holds up his hand with his head cocked to the side. I pause likewise, waiting, holding my breath and listening intently. My ears hone in on the sound of rustling foliage and snapping twigs. It grows louder, heading towards us, in the exact direction the deer were running from.
"Jesus,"
my granddad grunts.
"They're coming back this way. They'll have seen a..."
but he is cut off by the sudden emergence of the deer through the bushes ahead, rushing right at us from the green, gloomy shade. "Fish!" I shout out loud in a panic. The deer make no attempt to run around us the slightest and run instead directly towards our position. I raise the rifle and take rapid, shaky aim.
"Damn it, Steve, down!"
Grandad shouts, grabbing me by the sleeve and hauling me to the forest floor, back behind the log. "Steve?" The air escapes me as I crash with my granddad down to the ground, and the deer jump right over us. My granddad instantly takes position, cocking and aiming his own rifle over the top of the log, deathly focused.
"Something will have made them run like that. They'll have seen a wolf or a bear." "A wolf? A bear?" "I'd be surprised to see either at this time of the day. But as I said, something made them run."
My granddad remains cool and composed, the barrel of the rifle fixed on the damaged woodland ahead and along the deer's path. I stick close, watching out in all directions in case we are approached from the side, gun cocked and heart pounding. But nothing comes. We wait for a tension-laden minute, then another, muscles aching with the stress of simply holding ourselves in preemptive positions. But as I said, nothing else comes towards us. My granddad cautiously gets to his feet.
"Weird,"
he mutters.
"We'd better move on out of here. Come on, stay alert, but let's go."
I nod in reply, and together we make a swift but careful exit from the little grove, heading back through the woods and retracing our steps. After what I hope is something of a safe distance, I ask my granddad a question. "Why'd you call me Steve back then?"
"Huh?"
"When the deer were coming at me, you called me Steve. You said, 'Steve, get down.'"
"Huh, is that so?"
my granddad asked, scratching his chin.
"I don't know. You know Steve, though, right? Old friend of mine. I swear I've mentioned him before."
I consider. Yeah, maybe, once or twice." Grandad shakes his head.
"I've definitely talked about him more than that. You probably weren't listening."
He sighs.
"It was just the moment, I suppose. The way you were standing, the deer coming right at you, raising your gun. What would have happened if you'd shot one, huh? It would have gone right down and knocked you out with it."
"I don't know, it wasn't all that big."
"It was bigger than you're giving it credit for, and at that speed, would have flattened you. It's what I told Steve all those years ago. He did the exact same thing, the idiot."
"What's he up to these days?" My granddad does not reply. He only looks out into the depths of the forest. We are atop a high hill, and the trees give way to the view across a deep, green valley. The sky is gray overhead. The man tuts and shakes his head.
Steve isn't around much anymore."
"Oh, sorry, he's not dead, is he?" My granddad grimaces.
"I don't know, exactly."
"You don't know?"
"Look, just drop it, kid. A story for another day. Let's just get back to the campsite. Cook the rabbit we caught earlier."
He pauses, putting out a hand, and I stop at once, following his line of sight. I hadn't even spotted it, but it chills my blood to see it now. Gives me the shivers even remembering. We stand only a few feet away from a deer. It's one of the same deer as before, I'm sure of it. Neither of us had spotted it because the thing is standing entirely still, like a statue. A taxidermy, almost.
"The hell?"
Grandad whispers, staring at the creature in surprise. He squints and then leans over to me.
"It's breathing, though only barely. Look down there at its chest."
I do so, taking the spectacle in. The deer has one hooved foot placed against the trunk of a tree, which in itself is quite curious already. But the animal does not move, even slightly. It does not blink.
"Hey!"
my granddad barks, then louder.
"Hey!"
He claps his hands, but the deer does not react. Then, in time with a sudden flurry of water from the rain-soaked leaves above us, the deer slowly turns its head, all the way around, until it is staring at my granddad and myself, one eye on each. My stomach drops, though I am unsure as to why. The deer is, I don't know, something is wrong.
"The thing must be sick,"
my granddad murmurs.
"We'll take a different route back, go wide of this creature." We're too close already as it is.
Yeah, I mumble, and the two of us edge away and through the undergrowth, taking a new direction as the deer watches us go, deathly silent. I shiver as it at last passes out of sight, lost behind us to the watery green shadows of the forest. Later that night, after returning to camp and preparing and eating our catch, I bid my granddad goodnight and crawled into my tent, zipping the flaps up after me. I fumble around in the near darkness for a while, my lamp casting intense black shadows out in all directions as I shift it from place to place, trying to work my way into my sleeping bag. It doesn't feel particularly cold at the moment, but the temperature has the potential to suddenly drop at any given minute, and I don't want to wake up frozen solid at 3 a.m. As it happens, I don't. I wake at 3:15, not frozen, but slick with sweat. Roused from a dreamless slumber, my ears prick up at the sound of rustling and snuffling outside, right by my tent. I hold my breath and grit my teeth. It's this fear of the unknown that gets me. It's probably just a rabbit or a hare. But the possibility that it could be something larger, something more dangerous, is impossible to ignore. For some reason, my mind does not go to an image of a bear or a mountain lion or anything like that. It goes to the deer, frozen in place, eyes unblinking, head turning as it watches my granddad and I pass by. Something presses up against the tent, right by my head. I wince and stare at the bulging material through the darkness. I try not to think about the fact that I am separated by the beasts of the forest by a pair of what are effectively thin, flimsy sheets of fabric. Just ignore it, I tell myself. Ignore it, and it'll go away. I quietly roll over and scrunch up my eyes, determined to be a man and to not get frightened by the presence of some raccoon or squirrel. The creature sniffles some more, rustling about in the grass, in the dark. My heart rate increases as I hear the thing pawing against the tent's outer lining. And then, for a second, it stops entirely, and to my horror, I hear my granddad's voice.
It's breathing, though only barely.
The sentence comes crisp and sharp through the general murmur and backing breeze of the forest. The sentence is entirely devoid of cadence, as if read from a book by someone who has never known English.
Look down there at his chest,
says the voice.
Huff, huff.
Panicking now, I do not know what I am supposed to do. It's my granddad outside, playing a prank on me. It has to be. It must be. Because there is literally no other explanation that makes sense. Regardless of the fact that this is entirely out of character. Regardless of the fact that I have never heard the man speak in such a way, even in humor, in his entire life. He must be sleepwalking, that's it. My explosive heart rate cools just a little. That's it. The only possible explanation that makes sense. And if that's the case, then I can't just leave him to wander around outside. Despite my fear, I gently ease my way out of my sleeping bag. You might think me an idiot, but if my granddad is wandering around in the woods in a daze, he could get lost or seriously hurt. So I push aside my irrational terror, and with a shaking hand I reach for the zip, pulling it open with a noise that is far too loud for comfort. Stay up. In for a penny, in for a pound. I yank the zip open, and then the next, and then push my head out into the night, the cool air washing across my face as I raise the lantern to cast away the darkness. What I see is nothing. I jump outside of the tent, staring, lifting the lantern as the light falls across the long grasses and the nearby trees. We are still on the ridge of the valley, but the valley itself is shrouded in darkness. A small section of visible moon illuminates the very tips of the trees in silver, but I am too preoccupied to properly appreciate the natural beauty for now. I pace around in the tent in a circle and see no evidence of my grandfather. Grandad? I hiss out into the night, turning and raising the lantern up high. Still nothing. Something chirps softly from between the branches of the deep woods. I turn to face it with throat dry, but the trees give away no secret. I cross the grass and crouch down by my granddad's tent. The zip remains closed.
"Grandad,"
I whisper to no response. I try again, a little louder.
"Grandad?"
I hear a groan and a grumble from inside.
Huh?
I hear him muddle. Then,
The hell?
"Grandad, are you good?"
Of course I'm good. What's the matter with you?
"All right, nothing. See you tomorrow."
he murmurs something under his breath, and I hear the rustle of his sleeping bag as he rolls over. I stand up straight and stare out into the night. For a second time, that chirping sound rings out from the branches, and I make a hasty return to my tent, zipping the thing up tight and secure, shivering as I try to force myself back to sleep. It takes a long time, and I do not recall drifting off. My dreams are disturbing, and are largely comprised of the discovery that something crept into my tent, dream distorted and warped into impossible size. My dream self scrambles around from place to place as a nightmare slithers and swims through the shadows like water. It is a welcome relief when I awake safe and sound to the faded glare of tent-filtered morning sunlight shining into my face.
Ugh.
I mutter, sitting up straight and groggily rubbing my eyes. For a second or two, the reality of last night blurs into the dreams, but as I remember the truth, that bitterly familiar anxiety settles back in. I clamber out of the tent into the warming morning air to find my granddad washing his face in a pot of water.
Morning.
He grunts.
How you feeling this morning?
Not great, to be honest.
I reply.
You were sleepwalking last night.
Huh?
Grandad glances up at me but continues with his routine.
No, I don't sleepwalk.
You were mumbling nonsense and bashing into my tent at like 3 a.m.
I tell him.
I came to check on you, but you must have just gone back to bed.
My granddad pauses and looks right at me.
So that did happen then. You're disturbing me. Thought I might have dreamt it.
He stands up and scratches his jaw.
Tell me exactly what happened.
I relay the story, and my granddad remains silent until its end. Slightly paled, he looks around at our surroundings and down into the valley.
I knew it.
He mutters, almost imperceptibly.
It's the same place. The exact same place.
What?
I ask him.
What do you mean?
I came here with Steve once. I knew I'd been here before. I thought I'd picked the location pretty randomly, but I guess my subconscious had other ideas.
Grandad, I don't know what the hell you are talking about.
He stares out over the valley and I follow his gaze. We watch as a small flock of dark birds flutters around in a circle above the trees. Again, and again, and again. Around and around they go. He turns to look straight at me, his expression grim, perhaps even afraid a little. And this unsettles me deeply. Nothing is supposed to scare that man.
Pack up, Robbie. Make it good, and be quick. We are out of here.
In another atmosphere, I might have questioned him, but the vibe is clear. I do as he says at once, and in silence. We quickly pack away our gear, loading up our backpacks with constant furtive glances to the trees. The forest has dried somewhat since yesterday's rain, but the sky overhead is still a swirl of gray. We set out beneath its gloom, all trace of our modest campsite thoroughly erased. My granddad's pace is a little faster than normal. Bracken and pine needles are crunched underfoot as he strides through the woodlands. He clenches his rifle a little tighter, too. I break the tension.
Grandad, what the hell is going on? What aren't you telling me?
I was an idiot once before,
Grandad replies as a breeze washes its way through the boughs of the trees.
and I lost a good friend. I won't let the same thing happen to you.
We push through the bushes and pass by a large pond surrounded by thick, tangled weeds. I glance over to the water. The water is a grim gray-green and covered in a curious floating moss. The surface is broken by the heads of 3 deer, standing perfectly still. The entirety of their bodies below the necks are submerged, and they stare at us as we pass them by. On another day, I might have found the sight quite comical, but right now I feel nothing but cold, biting fear. One of the deer rises up from the water, rippling it quietly, rearing up onto its hind legs, and my granddad grabs my sleeve and hauls me along.
Don't stop moving. We are getting out of here. Just keep going, Robbie.
Our steps become faster, our breathing a little more labored. The trees rush by, branches scratch at my arms and my face. We push out into a clearing, and my granddad skids to an immediate halt.
What is it?
I ask, panting. Something moves in the shadows of the trees, shifting between the branches at the clearing's opposite side. The hair at the back of my neck bristles, and I instinctively raise my rifle. The sounds of the birds and the breeze fade away, and the air itself seems to darken as the shifting shadow ahead draws closer. It's difficult, near impossible to make out its exact shape through the layers of branch and foliage. But I swear, I can see a rough, vaguely humanoid silhouette amongst the shadows and the dark green-brown blur.
Did you come back for me, Robert?
Whispers a voice. My muscles tense up in reaction to my name.
Is it my name it speaks? Or my granddad's?
My granddad sucks some air through his teeth. He begins to carefully sidestep his way around the clearing, and I copy his movements.
You wouldn't leave me behind again, would you?
The voice is not dissimilar to the one I heard last night. It is different, sure, but the cadence, or lack thereof, is much the same. My granddad raises the rifle, cocks it, but he does not fire.
Keep going around, kid,
He says to me.
To the left. Pass through that part of the clearing there. I'll be right behind you.
I start to edge my way around the clearing, never taking my eye off the shadow in the trees just ahead. I'm trying so hard to focus on it, to understand what it is that I am seeing, but I can't. The very branches themselves seem to be moving, crackling and rippling in the shade.
Run!
My granddad shouts, raising the rifle and firing a loud shot up into the air. Unprepared for such a sudden noise, my ears ring as I scramble and stumble through the forest, along a natural path of sorts between the trees, though I stumble to a halt when I realize my granddad is not behind me.
He told me to run, but do I go back for him? I have to. It's a no-brainer.
So I swivel around and prepare to charge back to the clearing when the man himself staggers out through the bushes towards me, face white as a sheet.
Get that damn thing out of my face, you idiot.
He grunts as he shoves away the barrel of my rifle, and together we race through the forest. My granddad dumps his backpack and I do likewise, leaving the equipment behind us as we tear through the undergrowth, way back to where we parked the truck the other day. When at last we see it, waiting for us on the edge of a dirt track road, we throw ourselves inside, and my granddad stuffs in the key and turns it with a clank, the engine revving to life. The wheels spin and away we go, back through the wilds down the long back roads of the woodlands. I summon the courage, after a while, and once the air has cooled, to ask my granddad what he saw. What happened after he fired the rifle?
Thing tried to speak to me again. The deep woods, Robbie. I'm sorry for taking you there. They can screw with a man's mind, these places. Real bad.
There was something there, though, wasn't there? Something real.
Yes, I think so.
Was it?
I falter.
Who was it, Grandad?
A nightmare, that's all. Something that shouldn't exist by all the laws of nature.
Its voice. Did you recognize the voice?
You said you heard something outside your tent last night, right?
I nod.
It sounded like me,
Yeah.
I reply.
but it wasn't me, was it?
No.
I reply.
No, it wasn't.
Sometimes we hear voices. Doesn't mean they belong to anyone.
So why didn't you shoot it?
What?
His hands flex and clench around the wheel.
You fired the rifle, but you aimed up into the air, not at the shadow. Why did you do that?
To this, my granddad has no answer. He only reaches briefly across to pat my shoulder, and as the clouds swirl overhead, we spend the rest of the long drive home in a contemplative silence. Silence with the occasional glance to the thickets of trees that pass us by. When you get used to an apartment life, you grow what I call an apartment mentality. You start thinking about your room as a different world. It stops crossing your mind that someone else is living a completely different life right next to you. Maybe you're one wall away from some kind of freak or murderer. Sometimes, I think the world is like that. I think we are all in one big apartment complex, Room after room, world after world, all mostly identical. Mostly. There are odd worlds next to us, just like there are odd rooms. Some rooms have bulbs that give off a yellow, infected light over the walls, and black mold grows in the corners. Some rooms have no lights at all, and the only sound in the dark is a mouthless breathing. Some rooms have no people, but aren't empty. Occasionally, we can hear sounds from the other room. At night, we might hear knocking. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be morbid. Some images keep coming back to me. I'll try to be straightforward from now, but I can't make promises. These memories I'm about to share have a habit of fogging my mind. I don't want to remember what happened that night. This is the last time I'll tell this story. This is what happened to my apartment complex one night when the lights went out. Our brain hangs on to the funniest things, doesn't it? The artificial shade of red in the receptionist's hair when you go to see the dentist. The way your high school English room smelled after thunder. What I remember first about that night is the cold. I don't think it's ever dropped that low in October before, not where I was living. In the end, it might have been what saved me. Looking back, that apartment block, to put it nicely, I've seen nicer crack dens. If it was a dog, they'd have put it down. But I was young and I was broke, fresh out of college, no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no funds to actually do anything with my life. So I got a room for cheap. Turns out, cheap meant a landlord that could not have given a single ish about the people living there. Rolling blackouts came monthly, plunging us all into the dark. That's why I noticed the cold. I was due a spin on the bad luck wheel. Mold on the ceiling, no hot water, backed up drains. That night of all nights, I was dreading a power cut. My first port of call was my next-door neighbor. From the little I knew, he was an agreeable guy, and knowing how fast the landlord didn't work, I figured we'd have more leverage if it was the two of us complaining. As I stepped out into the dark corridor, my foot slid across the floor. I only just caught myself before I slid far enough to snap my ankle. Something wet and sticky splashed and squealed over my shoes. Feeling my way to the door, I rapped on the wood a couple of times. From inside, there was no reply. Either he wasn't in, or he didn't care. Yeah, on another day I might have sympathized, but when you can't run a hot shower or cook your microwave dinner, it doesn't put you in the best mood. As I went to knock again, the wood moved in. The door was open, just a crack. I shouldn't have, but I did. It was dark in there. I had to feel my way past the front door. At first, I thought I was right, another blackout. But my eyes soon adjusted, and I noticed this faint glimmer of light coming from the ceiling, where the bulb would be. Know how you can see the glow of the sun behind dark clouds? The bulb was filthy. For the longest time it wouldn't compute. I'd never seen dust that thick. Then I glanced at the wall. Not dust, a long streak of what could almost be mold oozing up the plaster, paint peeling away beneath, spanning the ceiling, reaching out to the bulb, choking off its light. I know I should have run. I should have burned the whole place down. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Easy to say that now. But in that moment, all I could do was follow the path of that stuff. I didn't even remember crossing the room. It was cool and slick beneath my fingers. It reminded me of... When I was 6, I managed to get my dad's matches down from the kitchen cabinet and accidentally set fire to the carpet. That's what it reminded me of. That warning panic. I followed it all the way through the apartment, hunting it through the dark. I'd been here before, even once in a power cut. Never like this. Framed posters loomed, cast in shadow, cracked glass on the floor, piles of cast-off clothes tracked over with dark slime. He'd never been a neat freak, my neighbor, but this was something else. I caught myself crouching low, walking slow, holding my breath, as if there was something in the room that might hear me and come near me. The trail ended at the bedroom door. That too was pulled shut but not locked. I'd come that far. I had to know. He lay on his single bed on top of the sheets, eyes closed. He should have been cold just in boxers. The water in the puddles on the street was this close to freezing, but his flesh did not shiver. As I bent down to look, I saw a hazy grin run up his face like a scar. Black liquid drooled out from his mouth.
"Hello?"
He didn't reply. It was almost a relief. I didn't want to explain why I was standing over his bed. I thought he was high on something, maybe, and that was a relief. Drugs I can understand, especially in that shithole. If only I could have believed that. His bedroom, like mine, was small and boxy. I remember there was a crack in his wall, running from the window to the corner. I gazed up at it. It was filled in now. It was leaking. It was pouring out a thick black liquid onto the floor. Once I saw that, everything else in the room I didn't notice before came into focus. It was dark in the room. The light switch was flipped on, but the bulb gave not even a glow anymore. The window was single-pane glass. That night, I couldn't see the orange flare of the street lamps below through the window. The glass was too thick, a black and glistened slime. It was dark in the room, and cold and bleak. But my neighbor's rictus grin was so wide his jaw split wide open. His fingers twitched, and beneath the lids, the eyes rolled back and forth. Once his head turned, and I saw a thick red welt out the base of his skull. It leaked a dark pus into the pillow. He was the first I found. I think I was too late by then. I hope so. When my brain finally took control of my body, I ran. In the blind and mad semi-darkness, I had forgotten about the spill on the floor. My foot skidded. I fell face first into the thick liquid. As I came back to my senses, I could taste blood. I checked my mouth for cuts, but soon realized that wasn't the source. I lifted my hand up from the puddle I was now sitting in and looked closer. The same black slime drooled over my hands. It wasn't blood, at least human blood. I stood up slowly this time, sane again, but just barely. I spat out the slime in my mouth and gazed across the floor, following the trail of the spill with my eyes. It led to my other neighbor's room, an old man. He should have been in a care home. No one talked to him anymore. No kids, no family. We were all alike in that building. We didn't even talk to each other unless we had to. Talk only brought the situation home. I'm a stupidly sentimental guy, so don't yell at me too much for what I did next. I wanted to help. I didn't feel like I could leave someone I sort of knew. I carefully pushed on the door. As the door moved about an inch, a horrid stench from inside assaulted my nose. I took a step back, covering my nose. That smell was far too obvious. It smelt like rotten meat. Now, before courage inside me withered, I opened the door and took a peep inside. A dirty bulb's glow cast over all. A black slimy substance covered the whole area, and a decaying body was submerged inside of it. I could make out the overgrown hair of my neighbor, and that was enough for me. I closed the door and emptied my dinner onto the floor. As I was picking myself back up, my ears picked up on a disturbance nearby. It was coming from my room. I inched closer to my room, not in a rush. I put my ear to the door and listened. Something inside was moving around. As I edged a little bit closer, though, I lost my balance on the slime and fell in. In an insane panic, I looked up, expecting some foul creature that was going around murdering my neighbors, only to be looking in the eyes of a roughed-up, slime-covered cat. It was the stray I had been feeding. He came visiting to my apartment through the window. There was a tree near there, for some food. I liked meeting it every day. It made me think there was at least one dude in the world who thought I was useful. It saddened me when he stopped visiting a week ago, but I figured something had happened or he had moved on from here, onto a better place. I almost mistook the poor creature for dead at first glance. I was ready to just grimace and move on, but seeing its ragged chest rise and fall faintly, I knew I couldn't. I stepped further into the room, my shoes squelching under the slime and bristles staining the floor. The cat was lying in a puddle of slime, eyes staring, unblinking. And yet, judging by the breath, it was inexplicably still alive. I scooped up the cat with little protest, cradling its body to my chest. No noise, no protests from the animal, just its ragged breathing. I needed to get out of here. I left my room. I didn't exactly want or really miss any of my possessions anymore. The thought of them crusted with slime and mold made my empty stomach twist. The hallway was somehow even worse. The walls, the floor, the ceiling were practically oozing with a reeking slurry that slid and dripped like tar. It sure smelt like it. I instinctively held the cat closer to myself, giving the poor thing a comforting scratch to the cheek. But I had to get out of this horrible building, so I had no choice but to progress through the gore, hand clamped firmly over my nose, the other supporting the thin cat. As I tiptoed along the elevator, I realized that it wasn't entirely silent. It wasn't the tinny hum of a fluorescent overhead lamp, but a shuffling, a quiet shuffling, like hundreds and thousands of tiny somethings brushing and moving against one another. The source was indeterminable. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, and I was certain I was hallucinating if it wasn't for the cat's ears twitching. It could hear it too. The slime wasn't moving normally. It occurred to me as I was just about halfway down the accursed hallway to the elevator. It should have slid straight down the wall, but it wasn't. It was, excruciatingly slowly, twisting and turning, moving left and right. Some drips even reversed direction and crept back up the wall. My breathing quickened with the cat's. I didn't want to get closer. I wanted to investigate. I didn't want to endanger the cat, though. I got close enough just to see faint protrusions peeking from the slime, raised like little spirals. Hundreds of them. I walked a bit faster. And yet I couldn't help but freeze when I felt the floor beneath me crunch. My shoes were slick with the black slime, something darker floating within the tar. Shells. Snail shells. This place was infested with them, slowly moving, slowly crawling, spreading their slime, killing my neighbors. I had to get out of here. Reaching the doors, I thumped the elevator button. I wouldn't have trusted it had worked the best of time, but I wasn't taking the stairs in the situation. Besides the elevator door, I could see the stairs led down into an inky darkness. As the numbers ticked up, slow and uncertain, I began to be aware of another noise. It echoed, a shuffling noise. They were coming from the emergency stairway. Something was coming up the stairs. In the sparse hallway lights, I saw them emerging. Hundreds of faces floating out of the dark. Sobbing faces, leaking black liquid out of every orifice. The lonely faces, the rotting faces. Oh my God, they were part of something else. The faces were trapped on a titanic shell, the shell of something rising towards me. I was so absorbed in the twisting, calling patterns of the shell, the pathetic pile of sludge at its base fell into the background. Until I saw a slimy human hand reach out from the slimy mess and pull along the shell of faces towards me. I saw the pale, blurred face of an old man from inside the sludge, staring at me, talking to me.
Come back. I'm sorry. Don't leave your father alone down here.
The elevator doors opened. Without looking away from the stairway monstrosity, I stepped in. That was a mistake. I knew as I felt a cold, wet hand fall on my shoulder and a little girl's voice whispered,
"Mama, why did you leave me?"
Without looking back at whatever was in the elevator with me, I jumped back into the hallway.
"Don't leave me again, Mama. Don't let them take me alone."
I began sobbing as I stumbled my way back down the hallway, away from the elevator door and the stairway. I couldn't breathe in the terror. No plan, no way to go. Die in the dark, go mad in the cold, wet dark. In this state, I felt claws digging into my arm. The stray cat burst out of my arm. It weakly pushed in the direction of my room before turning and looking at me. The tree. There was a tree outside my window. I picked up my weakened companion and began that long, long run down the hallway. From my neighbors' apartments, I could hear whispers, calling out to me. Doors were opening, were coming undone. My mind was falling apart. I think I was crying. I think I screamed and sobbed. My next sane memory was of my apartment below, the open window out of the dark and empty cave. The branches looked so far away, like the hands of fickle friends. The cat was in my arms, but I wouldn't let it down. I think I would have gone insane before I let it go. I needed to leave the building, anyway, anyhow. I couldn't stay there alive and sane. I had to jump. Either way the fall shook out, I had to jump. If there was nothing but the ground below, I would have jumped anyways. So I looked at the branches and that fall and the horrible distance below, and I jumped. I no longer live in an apartment block. Me and my cat, we are not picky. I can't say we've landed on our feet yet, but we can manage. After that night, no one contacted me. There was no police investigation, no missing persons report. The building stood, but no one cared. I'm not surprised. If I hadn't gotten out, my own family wouldn't have cared. Like I said, we were all like that. To everyone else, nothing of value was lost. The landlord died the night before, and with him, the only interest in our survival. We were a collection of abandoned toys on the playground, and eventually, a stranger sat down to play. So what happened that night? I don't know, but I believe certain things. I believe mold grows in the corners no one sees. There are maggots that feed on lonely things. There might be another form of rot, a fungus that seeps through dimensions and grows on the forgotten prey. Even now, the apartment complex stands abandoned. No one comes, no one goes. I hope it stays that way. These days, my legs are healing quite well. So is my Terra, my cat. Yeah, I was wrong about the gender. The memories, those are quite a different matter. I hope this will be the last day I think about that night. Oh, and I have another theory. Why didn't I or Terra change? Why were we able to leave? I think when we saw each other, neither of us felt entirely abandoned. I am an avid hiker and happen to live near a national park that I think it's best not to name. Me and my friends go hiking there often, or I guess, did. If you have ever been to a national park, you might have noticed certain areas were restricted for one reason or another. This one was no different, and the reason we were given was that the terrain was too dangerous. To me and my friends, this only made it sound more fun. When you spend as much time in a park as I, you begin to catch on to the ranger's routine. Soon you are able to avoid them with ease. And so, we made our way into the restricted area. We were soon met with disappointment, as the terrain was quite flat and boring. It may have even been safer there than other parts of the park. My friends and I started speculating why they might want to keep people out of here, and then we started getting shot at. We started running. I made the mistake of looking back. I didn't see the shooter, and I didn't see the hole in front of me either. After falling a good 10 feet, I began examining my legs to see if I'd broken them. My eye caught something. Behind some rocks was an old and deteriorating satchel. Contained within it were some shotgun shells and what appeared to be a journal. Soon, my friends came back and helped me out of the hole. We all escaped without taking any bullets. One of my friends proposed the idea that they were simply trying to scare us away and may have only been using blanks. But that didn't make any sense. What could they be trying to hide? And why would they keep it in such a public area? Now, I think I know the answer. Once home, I began looking through the journal and found that many of the pages, although frail, were still intact. The name Ellie Johnson was written on the front. The remaining pages read as follows. 10/6/1915. The trees are all beautiful this time of the year. It's a shame the leaves don't last long. I'd rather they look this way all year. I used some of the leaves to make beds for the sheep. I felt they could use them as it's getting colder. Dad says it will be even colder this year because our new land is up higher than the old. At first, it didn't make much sense to me, but now I can feel he's right. 10/8/1915. I've noticed my chores get done a fair bit faster now that there isn't much more than a cow and some sheep to feed. But this has left me with nothing much to do. My friends are all miles away now, and there ain't anybody out here but us.
I tried to help Mom when I can, especially since she's carrying my little sister or brother, but most of the time she insists on doing things herself. I never thought I'd want more chores. 10/9/1915. Nothing much happened today other than the sheep escaped for about half a minute before Dad caught her. Ain't really sure why I opened this book. 10/12/1915. Dad's bringing a friend of his up here to go hunting. His name is Stan. Can't say I know him too well. I only met him once in church. I asked Dad if I could come with them. He said someone had to stay back and help Mom. He was right, I suppose, but that don't make me happy about it. 10/13/1915. I woke up this morning and found it snowed in the night. It's got to be at least 3 inches. I went to see what Dad might have brought home, but he hasn't got back yet. Mom's real worried, and so am I. Dad's usually only gone a few hours, never all night. He's never gone hunting in those woods before, neither. I told Mom I should go out and see if I can find him, but she didn't much care for that idea at all. Says I'll get lost too. Says we should just wait. So, I suppose that's what we are going to do. 10/14/1915. Dad's still gone. I told Mom that someone was gonna have to go looking for them, and since she's pregnant, it was gonna have to be me. She began to cry, saying she ain't gonna lose her entire family. Then she said if he wasn't back tomorrow, she'd send me into town to get help. I didn't want her any more upset than she already was, so I agreed. But I know he ain't gonna be back tomorrow, and if he's hurt, he's gonna need help quick. So when Mom went to bed, I grabbed the shotgun by the door and some shells. I took a lantern too. If I find Dad and Stan, I'll help them back home and Mom will be happy. And if I don't, I'll come home and she'll never know. 10/16/1915. I think I'm lost. I followed the footprints leading into the forest, thinking I'll find them in no time. But that damned snow kept falling and the footprints began to fade till I couldn't see them anymore. At least not with my little lantern. But I wasn't gonna let this stop me. I kept walking where I figured they must have kept going. This foolish idea went as well as one might suspect. That lantern ain't worth dirt. I didn't know I was on a hill till I was rolling down it. I hit my head against a rock on the way down, and everything went black. I woke the next morning half buried in snow, but by the good grace of the Lord, I didn't break any bone. I climbed back up the hill to find that the snow had already erased my tracks just the same as the others. I thought if I just keep walking straight, I'd end up back home, but after a half hour I was still in the woods. I kept on wandering in every direction without finding nothing but more trees and snow, like the damn thing goes on forever. Didn't see a single animal either, not one squirrel nor bird, like these woods are dead. I did find a small cave. I reckoned it'd be better than sleeping under a tree, but I didn't get any sleep. Something strange started howling as soon as I closed my eyes. It didn't sound like any wolf I know of. Ain't really sure how to describe it, but it was close by, much closer than I would have liked. I thought I might have been trying to sleep in its home, so I kept the gun ready. It didn't stop until the sun began to peek through the trees. Only then could I rest. I awoke about midday. I wonder if Mom is alright. Probably not too happy. I hope she don't come looking for me like a fool. Like me. I hope she goes and gets help. 10/17/1915. I think it's the next day, but I ain't sure. Ain't sure of anything. I began another day of hopelessly trying to escape the woods. I don't think they ever end. I think home may be 1,000 miles away, if even that close. I came across some footprints. They were bigger than a bear and had inch-long claws. Next to them seemed to be the marks from something being dragged along. I followed them. I know it wasn't smart, but it was something. Something in a forest of nothing. As I followed, I'd find blood around the tracks every now and again. I kept walking till I came across a cave. This one was much larger than the one I used for a shelter. There was something inside. It was a giant beast, hunched over, eating something. There was blood all around the mouth of the cave. I saw the bones of the creature's back poking through its gray skin. I stood frozen and started to cry. I wasn't sure why at the time, but now I believe it was because I knew who it was eating. Before I could make too much noise, a hand went over my mouth, and I was dragged behind a nearby rock. It was Stan. He gestured at me to be quiet and asked for the shotgun. I gave him it. I asked him what happened to his gun. He told me he dropped it while running away from that beast. Then I asked where my dad was. He didn't answer. I tried keeping my tears quiet, but I failed. In the blink of an eye, that antlered monster had its jaws on my leg. I screamed in pain before Stan shot it in the face. It released me and turned towards him. He then shot it in the chest. That didn't seem to do too much good other than making it mad. The gun was now empty, but the monster was enraged. Stan ran off into the never-ending forest with the abomination gaining behind him, leaving me alone. It was going to catch him, and kill him, and drag him back here. And then it was going to do the same to me. I got up and began limping away. I kept my eyes closed until I was past the cave. I didn't want to see what was inside. I didn't get far before falling through the earth, and now I'm stuck in a hole. I don't think it's a work of nature. It's much too deep for that. It seems instead to be a trap, dug by a demon. I'm not sure how long it will be before it finds me. One of my legs is broken, and the other has been badly wounded by that beast. I can't get out. The skin around the bite wound is beginning to turn gray, and I feel sick as a dog. Mom, if you find this, I love you. And also, run.